Your brain is already syncing to rhythms you never chose. The hum of traffic outside your window, the flicker of screens, the cadence of other people's conversations, all of it is pulling your mind into patterns that serve someone else's agenda. What if you could choose the rhythm instead? By the end of this, you'll understand exactly how sound becomes a tool for shifting consciousness on command. Every cell in your body oscillates, your heart beats at a rhythm, your breath follows a cycle. And your brain, that 3-pound organ generating electrical impulses right now as you listen, pulses at measurable frequencies that determine whether you feel anxious, calm, focused, or transcendent. This is measurable through electroencephalography. Electrodes on the scalp pick up these oscillations, and researchers have catalogued them into bands. Delta waves pulse between 1 and 4 cycles per second during deep dreamless sleep. Theta sits between 4 and 8 during deep meditation and the hypnagogic state just before sleep. Alpha occupies 8 to 13 when you're relaxed but aware. Beta runs from 13 to 30 during active thinking. Here's what makes this relevant to your practice. Your brain doesn't generate these frequencies in isolation. It responds to external stimuli. The frequency-following response is a phenomenon where the brain's electrical activity synchronizes with a periodic external stimulus. Play a steady tone, flash a rhythmic light, or introduce any consistent oscillation into the sensory field, and measurable brainwave activity begins to match that frequency. Your brain follows the beat, the way a tuning fork makes a nearby fork vibrate at the same pitch without physical contact. Your neural oscillations lock onto incoming rhythmic signals. This was first documented in auditory research decades ago. Scientists noticed that when subjects listened to repetitive auditory stimuli, their brain's electrical output shifted to mirror the frequency of the sound. The response originates in the brainstem and propagates upward through the auditory cortex. Your brain treats rhythm as information about the environment and adjusts its own state accordingly. Think about what that means for your inner work. You've been told that meditation requires years of discipline, that stilling the mind demands iron will. And yes, the discipline matters. But you now have a mechanism, a physical, observable phenomenon that explains why certain sounds accelerate the process. The Tibetan singing bowls, the chanting of Om at specific frequencies, the drumming traditions found in every indigenous culture on Earth. These practices predate neuroscience by thousands of years. They worked before anyone could explain why. So why does a brain built for survival bother synchronizing with external rhythms at all? Because pattern matching is fundamental to how consciousness orients itself. Your brain is constantly predicting what comes next. A steady rhythm gives it something to lock onto, a scaffold, and once locked, the entire system stabilizes at that frequency. The mental chatter that normally jumps between beta frequencies, it has no choice but to slow when the dominant input is a theta range stimulus. But there's a subtlety most people miss about this process. The frequency-following response works best when the stimulus falls within a range close to a frequency your brain already produces. You can't force a brain into a frequency it has no capacity for. What you can do is guide it from where it is toward where you want it to be. This is why effective sound meditation doesn't start at the deepest frequency immediately. It meets you where you are, perhaps in high alpha or low beta, and gradually descends. The brain follows because each step is small enough to feel natural. This mirrors something profound about inner transformation. You can't leap from anxiety to bliss in a single bound. You move through stages. The sound gives your brain permission to take the next step, then the next. Each frequency band you pass through has its own quality of consciousness. Alpha brings relaxation without drowsiness. Theta opens the door to imagery, intuition, and the subconscious material that drives your assumptions about reality. Delta, when reached consciously, touches what meditators describe as pure awareness without content. The ancient practitioners understood this architecture through direct experience. When Neville Goddard spoke about the state akin to sleep, that drowsy receptive condition where assumptions impress themselves on consciousness, he was describing theta. When mystics across traditions speak of going within to the silence, they're pointing to the same neurological territory. The frequency-following response validates these traditions by showing the mechanism through which they operate. Now consider binaural beats as a modern application. When slightly different frequencies reach each ear, say 200 Hz in one and 210 Hz in the other, the brain perceives a phantom beat at the difference frequency, 10 Hz in this case, alpha territory. Your auditory system creates a rhythm that exists only inside your skull, and your brain synchronizes with it. The stimulus is generated by your own perceptual system in response to the inputs you chose. You are, quite literally, using sound to program your own state. There's a counter-argument worth addressing honestly. Some researchers argue that binaural beats produce weaker entrainment effects than monaural beats or isochronal tones, where the rhythm is present in the actual sound rather than generated perceptually. Fair point. The research on binaural beats specifically shows mixed results in controlled studies. But the broader principle of auditory entrainment, frequency following response itself, remains robust across methodologies. The specific delivery mechanism matters less than the principle. Rhythmic auditory input shifts brainwave patterns. Whether you use binaural beats, singing bowls, repetitive chanting, or a steady drum at 4 beats per second, the entrainment phenomenon holds. What does this mean for your daily practice? It means you have a tool that bridges the gap between intention and state. The hardest part of meditation, for most people, is the transition. You sit down with racing thoughts and try to will yourself into stillness. That's like trying to slow your heartbeat through sheer determination. It works eventually, but it's fighting the current. Sound gives you a current to ride instead. Picture your morning practice. You sit, the mind is already churning with the day ahead. You introduce a theta frequency stimulus, a specific tone, a bowl struck at a particular resonance, a track designed for entrainment. Within minutes, measurable changes occur. Your brainwave patterns begin shifting. The internal monologue doesn't stop through force. It fades because the brain's dominant operating frequency has moved below the threshold where verbal thought sustains itself. Language requires beta. Drop below beta, and the narrative mind loses its footing. This is why Goddard's technique of entering the state akin to sleep works so effectively for impressing new assumptions. In theta, the critical faculty, that analytical filter that rejects ideas incompatible with current beliefs, operates at minimal capacity. The subconscious becomes receptive. Affirmations and mental scenes impress themselves with unusual depth because the gatekeeper is stepped aside. Sound doesn't just relax you, it opens a specific neurological window where consciousness becomes programmable. The discipline still matters, profoundly. You still need to hold your desired state, maintain your mental scene, persist in your assumption against contradictory evidence from the senses. Sound doesn't replace the inner work, it creates optimal conditions for that work to take root. A gardener still needs to plant seeds and tend the soil, but gardening in fertile ground versus concrete, the results differ enormously. There's something else worth noting about consistent practice with sound entrainment. Over time, your brain learns the pathway. Neural networks that fire together wire together. This is Hebbian learning, one of the most replicated findings in neuroscience. Each time you use a particular sound to reach a particular state, the transition becomes faster. Eventually, you may find that merely hearing the opening seconds of your meditation track triggers the shift. The sound becomes an anchor, a conditioned stimulus that your nervous system recognizes as the signal to move into receptive consciousness. Ancient traditions encoded this wisdom into ritual. The temple bell, the call to prayer, the opening chant. These weren't decorative, they were functional technologies for state shifting. Every repetition deepened the neural groove. Every ceremony made the transition more automatic. Modern neuroscience arrived at the same conclusion through different vocabulary. Your consciousness is more responsive to rhythm than you've been taught to believe. Every environment you've ever entered has been entraining your brain without your consent. The frenetic pace of social media, pushing you towards scattered beta. The blue light of screens, suppressing the melatonin that facilitates theta transition. The noise floor of urban life, keeping your baseline frequency elevated. You've been entrained downward for years. Sound meditation is the conscious reversal of that process. You choose the frequency. You choose the direction. You choose which state your brain synchronizes with. And through that choice, you access layers of consciousness that most people only touch accidentally. In the moments before sleep, in flow states that arrive randomly, in brief flashes during crisis when ordinary thinking suspends itself. Those states aren't accidents waiting to happen. They're frequencies waiting to be dialed in. The mystics had the map. Neuroscience built the compass. Your breath, your intention, and a steady oscillation at the frequency of deep receptivity, that's the combination. The assumption you want to impress, held clearly in that theta window, bypasses every objection your waking mind has rehearsed for years. Tomorrow morning, before the world starts its entrainment program on your brain, choose your own frequency first. Sit with a sound that pulls you downward into stillness. Let your brain do what it already knows how to do. Follow the rhythm. And in that space between waking and sleeping, plant the seed of who you're becoming. The ground has never been more ready than in that moment. Your brain is waiting for a rhythm worth following. Give it one.